Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here for a special edition here on Encounter Grace. As you know, my name is Jason McKnight, and we're here to talk about the war in Ukraine and what's happening and what God is up to and how can we help. So to lead us in this conversation, I'm pleased to have an old friend with me, Pastor Leonid Regeta from River of Life Church, all the way from Dallas. He was born in Ukraine. His family came to the U.S. as religious refugees some 30 years ago. And Leonid and I got to know each other while we were both in different seminaries, but we were part of the Sandy Ford Fellowship all the way back at the beginning of 2001, Leonid. Do you remember that?
Those were the days.
Those were the days. Well, welcome. Listen, I know you are doing so much right now. You told me just a minute ago you're getting by on 4, 5, 6 hours of sleep. And so we really appreciate you joining us here. Before we talk the heavy stuff, tell us a little bit about your family and a River of Life Church in Dallas, what God's doing there.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this broadcast. And thank you for raising awareness about what's happening in Ukraine and that part of the world. So I moved to the United States with my parents. I was still 15 at the time, and it was right before the Berlin Wall fell down, before the Soviet Union collapsed, before all those monumental changes were happening in that part of the world. I'm a fourth generation underground church Christian, so you can imagine the shock and awe and differences that we encountered when we came to this country. But we will be forever grateful to the United States for the freedom it offers everybody to worship God as we understand and as we base our worship on the Bible. I am a pastor right now. I call it an accidental church plant. We didn't mean to plant a church. We got kicked out of Russia many years ago. We were missionaries there in St. Petersburg. And when the Russian government wouldn't give visas to our kids to continue ministry there, we ended up here in Texas because 2 of my sisters lived here and they invited us to come and live closer to them. We started hanging out with some Ukrainians, some Russians, some Belarusians, Moldovans, and others. And before we knew it, there was a community of people surrounding us, and we had some picnics, some concerts, and we were like, Lord, what do you want us to do with all these people that are coming our way, including non-Christians? So to make the long story short, we accidentally planted a church and have been pastoring it for over 10 years.
That's great. I love it. And it's there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
It is. We are just north of Dallas in the town called Plano now. We still call ourselves Dallas Church because of the reference. It's easier for people to know exactly where we are. But there are about 70,000 Russian-speaking people of various groups. And I'm talking about Armenians and Ukrainians and Jewish and Moldovans and you name it. So that's for the Metroplex, Dallas, Fort Worth, and surrounding suburbs.
So you got to have great delis down there.
We do, and pierogies and pelmeni.
Oh, yeah, so good. All right. Well, you know, brother, help us. If I go 5 hours without reading the news, I'm behind 10 steps. As near as you can say at this moment, and we're recording this at 10 after 4 in the afternoon here on the East Coast, and we'll send it out a little bit later tonight. But what are you hearing? What's happening now in your home country of Ukraine?
So what is it, day 8 today? Mm-hmm. It's been a really difficult day for some areas of Ukraine, and also a relatively quiet day for other areas of Ukraine. I think right now there's an all-out assault on few strategic locations. Mm-hmm. Capital, Kiev, is being one of them, but also the southern part of Ukraine, the cities of Odessa and Kherson and Nikolaev and a few others. I got a word yesterday about assassins sent out to kill a couple chaplains that are ministering to the army, and the village where they were hiding was just bombarded with the heavy artillery, hoping to kill them. Thank God today I watched a live video of one of those chaplains, and he's alive and he continues ministering and delivering both spiritual and physical food and and supplies to those at the front lines. But it's not getting lighter. It's not getting easier. It's not getting simpler with each passing day. So day 8 has been pretty tough.
Mm. Every once in a while, we read a report, or I mean, everyone like through the day, but like where, hey, some Russian soldiers don't really want to fight. They've been told it's a peacekeeping mission. They discover that it's not once they get there. Everything in me wants to believe that, but then, like, what are you hearing from your friends? Are those things true, or am I missing it?
Absolutely true. Believe it or not,
Yeah.
this is absolute truth. Russian government is lying through the teeth to their own people. You would not believe the level of propaganda that is shown on TV. You would not believe the trust that people have, or maybe fear, not trust, fear that they have of the government, so they cannot believe and block themselves from believing anything else. You know, they just follow the party line, and they're told certain things, and that's what they're subscribed to. And I hear that from certain people. There are relationships broken right now. People block each other because they dare to voice information other than what is being officially presented by the party line TV or radio stations. There were a couple opposition or relatively free radio stations that were shut down yesterday in Russia. So people don't know what is happening. We're in the West here for a few weeks we're hearing of 150 or 200,000 Russian soldiers all surrounding Ukraine, right? It was on the news. We saw the pictures. We saw the satellite images. People in Russia had no clue that that's what was happening. They were brought, like these young guys, and they're young. They're 18, they're 19. I look at them and my heart wants to cry because they don't even look like soldiers. You know, they look like kids, like my kids. And I look at them and I'm like, when they get arrested or they get captured, they're interviewed, and I watch some of the videos of their interrogations. I mean, they're telling stories of officers telling them, let's go for exercises and you're going to be in Russia, and then they cross the border during the night. They don't even know where they're going. They're just told, you know, this is the direction where you go. They don't know that they ended up in Ukraine. And when they do, they were told, many of them were told that Ukrainian people will welcome them as liberators. Instead, Ukrainian people are ready to throw themselves under the tanks and under their armored vehicles, and they're cursing them and telling them to get out. And I saw some text messages of one soldier texting to his mom saying, I cannot take this anymore. I want to hang myself because they're telling us to shoot civilians, and people are not welcoming us here. This is not what I subscribed and signed up for. This is not the experience that I wanted to have. And this sort of propaganda and lying it has been happening for many years in Russia is almost like it reached its apogee right now, like culmination. And I'm not surprised at all to see those soldiers basically saying we had no idea. Now there might be some that are hiding and now saying we had no idea too, because that's a good thing to say. But I also have no reservations to say that for most of them, that's exactly what's happening.
I mean, seeing that guy kind of tear up and break down when he saw his mom on FaceTime from the Ukraine.
Did you see that?
Yeah,
I
mean, just breaks your heart. Well, tell us also. Oh, go ahead. Oh, okay. Tell us also. You have said already several times, and we all know it. It's day 8 of the invasion. I don't think Putin thought it would take this long. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm not in his council.
No, he didn't.
The Ukrainian military is doing far better than expected. Civilians are stepping up. What's gone on there?
Good Ukrainian people. That's what's going on.
There it is.
Yeah, that's what's happening. Actually, it's not just Putin that is surprised. I watched the interview with some major general of Pentagon here in the US, and they were saying that they didn't expect Ukrainians to last so long and be so brave. They didn't expect babushkas taking arms. They didn't expect women and beautiful girls getting guns and going out. I mean, there's a TikTok of one young couple that was married in an Orthodox church, a beautiful marriage ceremony. And next day they went out and they got arms and they went out, both of them, to fight. Lord protect them and keep them safe. That's all I can say. But basically, Ukrainians are fighting for their cherry blossoms. They are fighting for their fields and for their farmlands, and they will die defending that land. To tell you the truth, this is not the first time that Ukrainians were placed in that position. I do believe, and it may sound like a surprise to some of your listeners, but I do believe Ukraine is a bargaining chip between empires, between the West and Russia. It has happened before. More than 100 years ago, one of the most famous Ukrainian poets wrote a poem, and the title roughly is translated as "Looking into the hopelessness with hope." So you still have hope even when you're facing hopelessness, and that happened 100 years ago. Ukraine has had to make those tough decisions and had to fight and had to stand up and protect its identity, its cultural, ethnic heritage. It was fighting facing west. It was fighting facing east. It was fighting also facing south to Turkish Empire at some point as well. So we had that happen before, and I think that DNA still is a part of people who are out on the streets and basements and rooftops defending their country.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more question about the news coming out today. Not so much about the news, but about where to get the news. Because of all the disinformation and all that sort of stuff, how do you steer people to good sources for news coming out of Ukraine and Russia and the world?
I have a hard time with that myself, because everything is so fluid and everything is happening so fast, and sometimes the radio stations have to move their offices in the middle of some fighting, so connections are lost and there's no reception and all of that. I got caught one time of posting something that turned out to be fake, and I had to apologize and remove that from my social media and personally send some messages to people that were voicing concern about that being not exactly true. But overall, I think we just have to kind of check variety of sources. That's my recommendation at this point. Just don't rely on one channel. Don't just rely on Fox News or CNN. Go to BBC, go to, if you can, other countries and their sources. Try to translate some of the news in Ukrainian or Russian. There's a lot of that, and relatively easy to translate as well. So just do your best, hang in there. We're all trying to figure out what is happening.
Yeah, that's good. And I just, you just don't want to be the guy sending out the sentimental thing that's just false, because everybody wants hope. Okay, let's go from what's happening right now a little bit into the background, and you kind of already began it. I'd love to ask you maybe 3 questions or a fourth on the bigger picture. First question is this: why do you think Putin invaded? What do you think he was expecting?
Putin has invaded Ukraine because he has never agreed with Ukraine's autonomy. He actually had a speech shortly before invasion where he basically said Ukraine doesn't deserve its statehood. It should not be an independent country. We should be together, and that's Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, and maybe even other places. So we all know his famous comment from several years ago where he called the breakup of the former Soviet Union the most tragic geopolitical development of the 20th century. I mean, of everything that was happening in the 20th century. And we were talking about World War I, we're talking about Holocaust, we were talking about World War II. Of all of those things, for him personally, the biggest tragedy is the breakup of this empire. He is a third generation KGB officer. He was steeped in this mentality, in this mindset that this empire is all that matters. So of course he has tried and is trying everything he can to resurrect that empire, to bring those countries that sort of ran out of his sphere of influence back into the fold. But specifically Ukraine, and I would say especially Ukraine, because Ukraine has existed before Russia ever was. The capital of Ukraine, Kiev, was there before Moscow was ever before Moscow ever had its first inhabitant. I mean,
it was just the woods when Kiev was a beautiful city,
thriving and beautiful city with the help of Vikings from Sweden. In fact, they came down. That's why the Ukrainian flag has the same colors as Swedish flag right now. I don't know if you made that connection.
I thought of that today, but I didn't know it was because, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. So
y'all make Volvos there too?
Not yet. We might have a chance to do that. But check this out. In the year of 988, so that we're talking about more than 1,020 years ago, that's when then the country of Kievan Rus, that's what it was called, was baptized into Christianity. That's like more than 1,000 years ago. Now, the city of Moscow is about 800 years old. So it's younger by centuries than the country that was already existed where we have Ukraine now. So for Putin to lose that birthplace of his identity is, let's just put it very mildly, embarrassing. So he's doing everything he can, including going through such extremes right now. He calls it liberating Ukraine. And let's ask ourselves, liberating from whom? From what?
Right.
Like, he's trying to liberate Ukraine from the Western European influence because he wants to keep it in the fold of Russia. You know, this harmony, as he says, of Slavic people, which in itself is a historical distortion, because Russia is composed of more than 100 different nationalities and ethnic groups. You have some Oriental people living in Russia. You know, Siberia and North has Eskimos and a lot of ethnic groups that are not Slavic at all. You know, they're more Muslim, have been Muslim, like Tatars and Bashkirs, and Buddhist groups in Tuva, just north of Mongolia, for example. So, you know, they say conquerors write history, and that's what Putin is attempting to do.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it seems to me, as I've read it, and I don't know as much as you, the Budapest Memorandum 1994, where Ukraine gave up their nuclear arsenal in return for territorial integrity, and nobody did anything when Crimea in 7-8 years ago. And it just feels like he's been emboldened by the inactivity of the folks in the West. That's my take.
Well, you are spot on. I mean, can I be critical of the U.S. on this podcast here?
You're supposed to be. I'm Canadian. No, you're not supposed to be, but you're allowed to be, as long as you're not critical of Jesus.
And I'm not, coming out as critical. I'm just stating the facts here, but they happen to be critical because in 1994 in Budapest, there was an agreement signed between Bill Clinton and Boris Yeltsin, the president of Russia at the time, and Ukrainian president. And they agreed that Ukraine will give up its nuclear warheads, with Russia promising to not mess with its territorial sovereignty, and US acting as a guarantor of that. So US is saying, hey, we will be watching. We will make sure that that never happens. We will not allow that from happening. Well, for Russia, that went through the window, out of the door back in, 8 years ago when it annexed the Crimea, when it sent its separatists to break away, they called it parts of Eastern Ukraine. What did US do at that point? Nothing. Well, sanctions. But what's good for Ukraine, those sanctions? They hurt Russia, but they didn't help Ukraine. They didn't return Crimea back. They didn't return those two breakaway regions of Ukraine. And I think Putin got emboldened by that. He realized that, we can live with those sanctions. We survive, and look at my popularity ratings. Now we have the Crimea. Now we have these parts of Ukraine, and I can continue fighting every day and order some shootings happening just so that Ukraine will not drift toward the West any more than it already has. So I think it needs to be said that US is to blame for the 1994 Budapest Agreement not being enforced.
It's interesting how Proverbs says, don't put your name on someone else's loan. Like effectively, don't co-sign a loan. And this is not, your kid buying a car, but this sure is putting your name on a loan. And you're...
Well, I think you're putting your name on the loans of, 40-some million people who lived in Ukraine, and you default.
And the breadbasket of, so much of that part of the world.
Yes.
as well as other things. I actually did not realize how strong economically the Ukraine is. Anyway, we can talk about that. You said earlier you're fourth generation pastor, and the first three generation were underground pastors. I forget if you said this on here or if you and I, when we were talking 20 years ago, but you have your grandfather and your great grandfather both were in the gulags, in the Soviet gulags, for their faith. What was that like for you growing up? Did they ever talk about that? Was that part of your story as a family, or was it quieted?
Well, it was, we talked about it, but very cautiously. Let me give you a story. My great grandfather, who was a pastor at the time, he got arrested. He ended up in a Gulag concentration camp somewhere in the middle of Siberia. He got really sick. He was, you can imagine millions of people were dying from malnutrition and freeze and extreme harsh weather conditions, all of that. One day, he realized that's it, that he's dying. He cannot even go outside early in the morning. And if you stay behind, they just literally just come pick you up and throw you out into the snow, and you freeze to death with the very little breath that you still have remaining. But anyway, he, before falling asleep, he prayed and said, Lord, please accept my soul. This is my last day here. I'm looking forward to meeting you. Please bless my family. And with that prayer, he fell asleep. Well, in his sleep, the angel of the Lord came to him and said, you will survive. You will go back to your family. You will pass your faith on to future generations, and they will be ministers of the gospel in this country and beyond. And then the angel said, there will be time when gospel will be preached all throughout this Soviet empire freely and openly, in the streets, on stadiums, in houses of culture. There will be churches and church plants and all of that. Well, sure enough, he survived. He returned back to his family. He shared these stories, and his children and grandchildren, and I'm a great grandson, but all of us were telling him to hush and don't say this too much, because for saying those things, you could be thrown back into the concentration camp. So we heard about that dream, and we lived with the faith of that dream and with the conviction of our great grandfather. He didn't get to see that happen by another year or two. But up until his last breath, he was sure that will happen and will come. And sure enough, Ukraine was, up until 8 days ago, the country that enjoyed probably more freedom to worship God over the last 30 years than even here we do in the United States.
And I just saw something you had posted this afternoon about the strength of the church in Ukraine being a mission sending country. That's fantastic.
Well, I would say, and it's not just me saying, it's the mission organizations from around the world that compile these numbers and statistics. They say that Ukraine is the most evangelical and evangelistic country of Europe, period. It has more evangelical Christians than Spain and Germany and Italy and UK. So more evangelical Christians are located in Ukraine than anywhere else, number one. But it's also more evangelistic than any other country of Europe. And by that, I mean they're sending missionaries. I know Ukrainians working in mission work in India, in Africa, in Asia. I mean, my uncle who planted or participated in planting 27 churches in Russia, he moved to the US and he planted another 5 in the Seattle area. And he's Ukrainian. And here I am doing accidental church plant in Texas, and I'm Ukrainian. And I think God has a special blessing for Ukrainian people in that sense, and we want to live up to that calling, no matter what the circumstances.
Amen. Well, okay, 2 more questions. What are you praying for? And then how can we get involved? And the reason I want to ask what you're praying for is because it's your heart, it's your homeland. I mean, you love this country where you're raising your family. God's called you here and you rejoice. But, you know, your homeland. And so how are you praying there? And then how can we get involved? Because we want to pray like you, but we also want to get involved.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. I am definitely praying for peace, and I would like to invite everyone to pray for peace, not just peace for Ukraine, but also peace for Russia, peace for the United States. I think we're talking about conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Let's not forget that US plays a very big role in it as well, politically especially. Because there were a lot of negotiations. If we follow the news, there were a lot of talks between US and Russia, between Biden and Putin, and between different teams of negotiators from US and Russia. And when all of those broke down, when all of those collapsed, you know, then fights started happening in Ukraine. So again, Ukraine is a bargaining chip between the US or the West and Russia. I don't know what the stakes are. It's above my pay grade, way above my pay grade. But there are some demands, there are some things that were discussed and probably are continued to be discussed that they couldn't agree upon, and that's like way above Russia and Ukraine. It's between Russia and the European Union, and most likely even the United States. So my prayer is that all corrupted politicians be humbled and be frustrated by God. There's a Psalm 33, verse 10 and 11, which actually says just those words. God, let your power, your strength frustrate the kings of this world. Let their plans be thwarted, so that your plans, the mighty plans, the sovereign plans, the plans that are for good, that's what the Bible says, let that take place. So please pray for the US. Please pray for Russia. I got a phone call or message this morning from a concerned mom. She said, my son is being called back to the army again, and I know exactly where he's headed, and I don't want that. I want to get him out of the country. How can I do that? Can I send him your way through Turkey or through Kazakhstan or somehow? And this is not even the first mom that reached out to me personally asking if we can help their sons, because they don't want their sons to die. Who would, you know? And a lot of people in Russia are suffering because they go on to the streets to protest this war. They're being arrested, they're thrown into prisons, and that's happening all throughout Russia. But the chokehold of the government over people in Russia is so strong, so bad that some people are just giving up and saying, what can I do? I cannot do anything, so I'm just going to be quiet. And especially pray for Ukraine, for peace, for this war to stop, so that moms and dads can be reconciled again, and dads don't have to say goodbye with tears in their eyes to their kids as they send them across the border. Oh, I mean, I look at those videos and those pictures. It's something that I never thought I'll see in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in touch with people there daily. Not just daily, every several hours, somebody's reaching out and asking questions or begging for help or clarifying directions of how to get to the border or where they can get shelter, that sort of thing. So speaking of shelters, you're asking me how can we help? Number one, please pray. Number two, raise awareness about Ukraine and the conflict there. Let it just be in your heart continually so you can be reminded to pray. But number three, in addition to being a pastor, I'm a chairman of the board of this nonprofit that has worked in Ukraine for many years. Nonprofit has been around for 22 years, so we have solid partners. We have accountability in place. And I think on the second day of the war, so like almost a week ago, we already sent thousands of dollars to some of those partners' churches, which actually turned their church facility into a refugee shelter. So hundreds of moms and children come through on their trek to leave the country to Poland or Hungary or Moldova. They come through, they're fed, they're given clothes, they have diapers that they give them, blankets if need be. They are prayed for, ministered to, presented gospel. And those churches actually told us, we will do this no matter what. But if you guys partner with us, especially financially, we will be able to accomplish so much more. So if any of your listeners would like to partner with us, the website is kids.org. And then I think it's /donate.
Yes, and I'm going to put that in the description here. So if you're listening to this, just scroll down to the description, hymforkids.org.
Yeah, so it's Hope International Ministries for Kids.org. So hymn for kids and number 4 .org. Your help, even if it's $50, $100, if your church would like to participate, if your church is looking for a place to or partner to invest and partner with, we would like to offer ourselves as that partner. We have photographs, we will have videos. We are already working in Ukraine, Poland, and Latvia on the receiving end. So we have our people in several nearby countries where they go to the borders, they pick up families and they take them and shelter them and feed them and provide for them. We do think it's going to be a long-term project to rebuild Ukraine, as you see all those buildings destroyed and just so much that will need to happen. Bridges and roads. I know that's more government responsibilities, but I'm more concerned about people's lives and livelihoods. I mean, churches in the future, when Ukraine wins, and they will win, we'll need to go and send our teams to do summer camps for those kids. And maybe initially we would have to bus those kids to nearby countries like Latvia and Poland and just give them a little bit of joy, even for 1 week, if Christians can come alongside Ukraine. But that's a little bit more long-term. Right now, we are concerned about, 1.2 million women and children that left the country already just in the 8 days alone. And there's a constant streaming that is still happening.
Yeah. And Sean Penn, he left.
He did. He tried to take as much film as he could, but I think those explosions were too much for him.
Well, listen, I'm so glad to know that not only can we learn from you, Leonid, but also if someone is looking for a way to give, here's a way we can help folks, help the churches be the gospel of Christ, be the witness and light of Christ in the cities of different parts of Ukraine. Hymforkids.org. Thank you, Leonid, for that. Thank you also for sharing with us what you're praying. And my brother, thank you so much for giving us your time. I know you're exhausted and you're going, but you're serving the Lord by helping us. And so I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. This is my third interview today, and I have one more radio interview tonight.
Well, you have a face for radio, so it's good.
Pastor, thank you and your people as well. Together, we will do whatever God wants us to do.
Well, and that's all we can do. But Leonid, thank you so much. We love your faith. We love the hope that you have in Christ, but also in the affairs of this world. And you know, when someone comes after your home, everybody fights just a little harder. And you're seeing that by your compatriots. And I love it. I love it. Thanks, Leonid, so much.
Thank you. Have a great day, you all. God bless.
And everybody, thank you for joining us here on Encounter Grace. And we will be with you the next time. Blessings.